So let's see. I when I started programming in '79, that was the first computer that the first computer I saw was a mainframe. There was a terminal connected to a mainframe that was, in the next room. It was an HP 9000. It was a massive room-filling computer, and the room next to it was full of terminals all connected to it on a timeshare system. And so that was the first computer that I saw, was this terminal thing. And in the next room, next to that room, was a room full of Burroughs computers, which I don't know what they ran, probably CP/M, and they had their own thing. I never even used those machines, and actually nobody else used them. They were all using the terminals. And then they had another room, but that room had nothing in it until 81. So 2 years later, that next room, finally, they filled it with Apple IIs. So that was when I first saw the Apple II, I think, was in that room. And I saw, looking over the student's shoulders, I saw that it had color and it made noise. Because the terminals didn't do that. They were black and white text only. And so now here's like graphics mode, and it sounded like it could do something, with sound. And I had never seen an Atari or a C64 at this point. It was 1981, so it was still pretty early. And anyway, I started asking the students in there, what commands did they know for turning on the screen? Colors and dots and lines and all that stuff. And so some of them knew, some of them didn't. But whoever knew, I wrote down, HGR, GR, plot, color equals, all that kind of stuff. And then I started to just play around with it. And I was in '81. That was let's see. The school year in '79 was starting 8th grade, 1980, ending 8th grade, starting 9th grade in '80. So I was in 9th grade, I think. Let me think. I think it was 8th grade, actually. I think I'm a year off. I think it was 8th grade. And 9th grade was actually, no, '81 was 9th grade. So so that was starting 9th grade in the second half of '81. And so the first half of '81, I saw the computers at the college, local college, and I was up there because they had a computer, and playing games for free was great because I didn't have a lot of money, and I only was delivering papers and stuff, and that didn't make that much. I'd spent all the money on Pac-Man, so getting to play stuff for free was cool. And even though it was a computer, they really didn't have that many games on it, but I did see some games on those computers. Like, I remember after seeing the computer there, then I started seeing there was a place called Capitol Computers in the next town over, and that was pretty much an Apple store. And so they had the games in baggies hanging off the wall in Ziploc bags. It's funny because it's like a big empty store with the walls, with stuff hanging on the walls, and they only had a few computers in there, and they didn't have anything in the center eating up space or anything, so it was like pretty empty, retail space. But at the school, I remember seeing Pegasus 2 for the first time, and that's where, I loved Scramble in the arcade, and so seeing Pegasus 2, I thought was pretty cool, even though it was mostly like a black and white game. It was neat that there was a mode where it let you create your own levels with the paddle, so you can create your different heights of terrain and then play through your own level, which I thought was really, really smart. And that was Olaf Lubeck's game. Yeah. No, I never even thought about it. I just thought it was cool, you know. In fact, I think it was the only game that I had seen that until Lode Runner. That was probably the first time I'd ever seen it. Did you ever see Pegasus 2? No. Yeah, Lode Runner. An interesting story about Lode Runner. Did I ever tell you the story of Lode Runner? The levels? Do you know what the original name of the game was? so so the original name of the game was Miner. That was the name, Miner. That was the name before Doug had sent it to Broderbund. And it was, Doug lived in Seattle, and he was making this game, and in the neighborhood, there's kids in the neighborhood, and Doug was older than the other kids, and he was programming this game, and the neighborhood, a couple of the neighborhood kids, I think two of them, used to come over that he knew and test his game for him, like a free QA team, and the kids thought the game was just awesome, and they wanted to make the levels. They saw him making levels, and they were like, "I want to make levels." So he thought, "Wow, maybe I should put a little mode in here where you can make levels." So he did, and those kids made a ton of the levels that were in Lode Runner. It wasn't all Doug that made those levels, and it ended up that one of the kids that did that is Darren Stinnett. If you know who Darren Stinnett is, he was the lead, the executive producer of Dark Forces and Jedi Knight and Outlaws. He was on Falcon 3.0 as the producer. So he's been involved in games for a long time, and it kind of started on Lode Runner before it was called that. Yeah. After I got Lode Runner, I started playing around with making levels. I didn't spend too much time doing it because I was more interested in just checking out a lot of different games, and I was also programming a lot at that time. Because Lode Runner came out in '83, and that was when I first learned assembly language. So, like, after learning assembly, that's all I could do. Was spend all my time trying to write code. Um, well, first it was I wanted to play. I love games, and I seen a computer. First was, wow, free games. First it was like, wow, I don't pay money to do this. And then on the actual mainframe terminal, before the Apples ever came, I said that I want to see if I can make something too, because these are kind of lame, and I bet I could make something better. And so they said, yeah, you can program it in HP Basic. So it was like, wow, okay, how do I do that? And just got a bunch of basic keywords and some, super basic information on how to, type the line number and the statements and stuff. And so my first program that I started writing was a text adventure modeled after Adventure, because that was the first time I saw Adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure, which was on the mainframe there. And so I wanted to try and make something like that. And so that was the first. I started making a game because I thought that the ones that they had were kind of lame compared to. I mean, I'm playing arcade games, right? And you go and see these dumpy games on these mainframes, and they're crap. And it's like, I want to make the stuff from the arcade, on the computer that I don't have to pay money to use. So that's kind of funny, because that's exactly what happened in the marketplace anyway. Everybody was copying the arcade games and making them, and selling them on the computers, because that's kind of what everyone wanted to do. The arcade machines were like the design templates for all of the actual home computer games. So I was going up to the school, and I was basically writing all that stuff down that I could get from the students. And the Apple Room was the most interesting after that point. Like, that was it. I was like, the Apple Room, this blows away those stupid old clunkers in the other room. This is what I'm talking about. Like, I didn't have a disk back then, so when I was typing stuff, it was going to go away as soon as I left the place, until I finally got a disk, because back then it was $10 a disk, and for like a Dyson disk, a nice one. So anyway, I was basically starting to write my own first little just graphics programs to just get something on the screen, and I used to come home. Actually, because I just started going to high school that year, I I found out that Capital Computer Store in Roseville was probably a mile away from my high school. So after school, I would walk all the way there and just ask the guys if I could play the games that were hanging on the wall. So I got to see a bunch of games that had just come out, all the Ziploc stuff, and just try stuff out. And it was like that was the first place I saw Gorgon, and so anyway, I was excited. I was like during school, I was going anytime that I had like lunch or whatever. I'd go to the computer room at school, which is full of apples. I'd spend all my time there, wait until after school, walk all the way down to the computer store, and then screw around, and then try and come back for the activity bus that can then take you back home, like for all the kids that do sports. So I was spending as much time as I could at the college during the summer, or two different places during school time. And when I was at home, I would just tell my stepdad, just the stuff that I was learning, and it was really cool and all this. And so he started thinking it'd probably be a really good idea to get a computer at home, and I'd be able to learn a lot faster. So he did. He spent $3,000 and got a huge Apple II setup with a printer, and he even got like the Microsoft soft card, if you remember that thing. It was basically Microsoft used to make Apple II peripherals before they made OS software, and so they made a soft card, which was really a card that you plug into your Apple II that has the CPM. It has a Z80 and CPM running on the card. So it's almost like I had two computers. I had a Z80 CPM machine in slot 4, and then the regular computer, the Apple II. And I didn't use the CPM stuff very, very often because I was more of the mainframe kind of crap. So I basically spent all my time on the Apple II. Like as soon as I got home, I was on the machine until they made me go to sleep. And it was all about learning BASIC and just trying to make games. And it was all about just games. I love playing games, and learning programming was really fun. It was a different kind of fun that I'd never experienced, because learning how to code is, for a kid, that's not any normal part of a kid's existence. It's like how to go outside and screw around and play games or whatever, but you don't know like programming. That's a totally different thing. So it was really fun to do the programming and to try and make games with it and try and emulate the arcade stuff. And so that became a goal, was to actually make good games. And so it took a long time. And so I just made game after game after game, and each one would always be learning one more new thing. Like in this one game, I'm going to draw graphics. In the second game, I'm going to use a paddle. In the third game, I'm going to try and have the player shoot something. And, like one game after another, I'm going to make a sound effect, whatever. So each game was always like doing something extra. And I knew in 81, and especially in 82, like I had reached the edge. I'd hit the end of what you could do in BASIC in 1982. That was like, I was drawing shape tables, I was optimizing my main loops in BASIC to do the minimum amount of stuff, but still there just wasn't the speed there. I was even using like Microsoft Task Compiler that could compile BASIC into binary, and that went way faster, but it was kind of unreliable speed. So it just wasn't there. I was like, I need to learn assembly language. And I had tried to do that actually in 81. I knew that I needed to learn a lower level language in the computer. And so I got this book called Programming the 6502 by Rodney Zacks. And Rodney Zacks is the guy who started Cybex, the book company. That was his first book through his own company. And that book was just awful for trying to learn how to program assembly. It was basically the theory of a processor, the theory of the way that the 6502 processor works in schematics and stuff. Nothing about Apple II game programming or even assembly language. There was nothing to type in. So that book wasted 2 years of my life pretty much, because I thought that I had a book that was going to teach me, and it wasn't. It wasn't the book at all. And until December of 82, in December of 1982 was really several things happened then. We were going to move to England in January of '83, and so at the end, in December of '82, I asked my mom, like, I need this book, and I knew that Roger Wagner's Assembly Lines, the book, it's called Assembly Lines: the book. That book was going to be the book that I needed, and also this guy named Jeffrey Stanton, who owned a company called Continental Software. He wrote a book called Apple II Arcade Game Design, and so I wanted those two books. And at the same time, I got this December '82 issue of Creative Computing, and in it was Apple Cart section for Apple II programming, and it was written by David Lubar, who's a game programmer, and he was basically showed a bunch of assembly language in there, and he was talking about what it did, which was it was actually a section of Mark Turmell's Beer Run program, and it was showing how he anded out and ored in shapes on the screen, and the techniques that Mark was using to do this stuff. And it was like, oh my god! So I had my mom get me a subscription to Creative Computing as well. And the funny thing is, in January, I found out that was the last issue for David Lubar. And so the next issue was a new guy named John Anderson, and he didn't write any code in there. Even though he was a game programmer, he did Sea Dragon, and he did Eliminator for Adventure International, but he just wasn't doing a bunch of game code in there. Even though I did get, I got the subscription, so I was going to read it. So I got those books, and we go and move to England. And the problem is, I took the books, but the computer had to go with everything else in the house, and that was by boat. That took 6 months. So I go to England with my books. There's no computer to use, right? And so I had to learn assembly basically through the book and hand assemble my code and just write down all the opcodes. I'd write the assembly out, and then I'd hand assemble it with the opcode lookup tables, and then write it all out, do my bitmaps on paper, draw the dots, and then turn that into hex, and do all that stuff. And then at school, they had Apple IIs. And so at lunch, I could go in and type in all my stuff that I had hand assembled the night before and watch it work on the computer. And so I kind of had to do that for a couple games, just basically writing it all out on paper, hand assembling it, and then going to school and typing it all in. And so I learned assembly without the Apple II. And then when it finally came, then I could really spend a crazy amount of time programming. So '83 and '84 were big programming years for me. I wrote a lot of stuff in assembly language. Mostly me. I didn't really, it's funny because I really didn't make them for anyone else. I made them, I started to figure out, it'd be cool to publish these games in the magazines, because I used to get Nibble magazine and A Plus and Insider, and those were the 3 Apple magazines. So I saw that they published programs in there, and so I wanted to try and do that. So I had sent them some of my early stuff, and they rejected, a shitload of that stuff. It was just all a bunch of rejections, because either there was too much assembly language, no one would type it in because it was just a wall of hex, and that's not useful for anybody typing it in because they won't learn anything. And if I printed it out in assembly, it would be too long. So what I had to do was figure out, and sometimes the games were just bad, so I had to basically figure out a game that would be fun and a combination of, code that had comments that were good for learning stuff. So I hit on the magic formula with a game that I wrote called Scout Search, and it was basically, for me, I was like, you know what, if I write the stuff that in assembly would take a lot of assembly language, if I write it in BASIC, not the game core stuff, but just the stupid high scores and menus and stuff like that, if I do that in BASIC, that's a lot less code, and then the real core stuff can be a real short and be an assembly language, and I can comment it and stuff. So I did that. Actually, Scout Search was so short that they just put a hex dump in there for the assembly language. They didn't even bother to annotate it because it was so short. And I think because that made it fit to 2 pages. two pages in the magazine. So they're like, wow, 2-page game. So my first game was, then I figured out what the magic formula was for getting stuff published. So every time I made a game after that was dedicated, like, this is a magazine game, then it got published. It was accepted because I knew what they needed, So so I got the covers of Nibble magazine 3 years in a row because December was the game issue, and they never published games outside of that. So I got the cover in 87, 88, and 89. And those, it's funny because when those things are published, they're years old already, those games. Scout Search. Yeah, it was published in the June issue 1984 of Insider magazine. And on my website, I have a photo section, and I have all a whole bunch of my games and the articles up there with the pages and stuff, the cover, and table of contents, and all that stuff. So each of the games I published, all the I just have a ton of pictures on my site of scanned in things. Yeah, use whatever I got. Anything on my site, just take it and use it for anything. I have a ton of stuff. I just uploaded a ton of stuff, just like this last weekend. I just went and found a whole bunch of scans and everything. I just threw 50 more things up there. So anyway, yeah. So that's how I learned assembly, and I knew. Okay, so you're asking about my classmates. The funny thing about that was, before I went to England, I was, super computer geek guy. And so, all I cared about was programming, didn't care about girls or anything. And so I basically made up, a bunch of the utilities and some games, and I used to write little flyers for them and draw advertisements and hand them out at the computer clubs and do everything. I was basically trying to market my stuff myself, and that's all I cared about. When I went to England, okay, so in California, was in Roseville, California. That's where I was doing this computer club stuff and my little company, Capital Ideas Software. And the kids that were in the computer club and in the computer class and stuff knew that I was totally dedicated to coding and stuff, and they were also some decent programmers. I think one of them might have known assembly in that area, but I never saw them write any games. But I didn't feel in that class like I was too far ahead of anybody. I was ahead of some of those guys. But there was maybe 1 or 2 people that might have known more than I did. But I had just gotten my computer at home, so that that kind of makes sense that they would still be kind of equal. Then when I went to England, the funny thing was in California I had to take for my freshman and sophomore years, I had to take PE, physical education, right? Go to England, and they basically say, yeah, you don't need to have 2 years of PE, just 1. And I'm like, well, I already did my 1, so what can I do you have a computer class? And they're like, yeah, except that I came to England during the second half of the school year, right? And so they're like, well, it's a basic programming course, and you're coming in at the second half of it. And I'm like, look, that is not even an issue here. Let me talk to the teacher. And then he said, you'll have to have the teacher sign off and everything. So I went and I talked to the teacher and told her basically, yeah, I know some assembly language. I've done basic programming for a couple of years now. Been writing games and stuff. And then I showed her the stuff that I had, some of the games I had written with shape tables and graphics and all that kind of stuff. And so she was pretty impressed, and she's like, yeah, you can definitely get in the class. And that was the first day. And so the second day, I come to class, right? Second day at school, I come to class, and she tells everybody to work on something, and she goes, you come with me. And so I leave with my teacher. She was the algebra teacher in school, trig and algebra and geometry and stuff. So she took me, and we got in her car and drove across base, because this was on a U.S. Air Force base. And so we drove to an area called the Aggressors Squadron, which is where the pilots and stuff are at. And so I went in there, and evidently she was out the night before and started talking to a captain and telling her all about this kid, brand new kid from California, blah, blah, blah thing. So he's like, bring him in, because we can have him get to work. So she brought me over there to meet him, and he was a really cool guy, and he wanted to show me the vault, because they actually had a giant vault door, like a bank vault door, that he had to say some code words, and then they would open it, and then everyone inside would hide their stuff because there's someone coming through. And so I come in there, and he takes me through this bank vault to the very back where there's a Romero mini computer, on the side in a terminal, and said, "You think you can program that?" And I just looked, and there had books and stuff, and I'm like, "Yeah, it's HP Basic, so it's basic, whatever, it's easy." So he's like, "All right, how often can you work?" I'm just like, "Well, whenever." So I worked there for a couple months during the summertime, after the school thing was out. We kind of made plans, and then I would go there for probably a couple months and just work on programming. I was porting stuff over from an older system to more newer HP Basic, the Romero system. And anyway, it's pretty funny just getting to do that. And I guess all the other kids knew that, so they and I knew more than every other kid in the place. I knew more than the teacher and everything. So it was like I was already programming God over there. So so in high school there was no programming competition at all, and so I got to do I got A's in computer class. I had an independent study class that was all just basically playing Atari 800 games all day long. I got an A in there, and so well, Nasser Jabeli is my favorite. He's my number one programming god idol guy. And he was pretty awesome. You saw. I like Nasser because the funny thing is that Sirius Software at some point, so early on, seeing Nasser's games, I really liked the speed of the games. I thought that the speed was great, and he was reaching further than other people with Horizon 5 and Zenith with his 3D work that he was doing. And Sirius Software, basically came out with a bunch of action games, and Nasser had made 9 in the first year, and that's just a ton of games, and he was basically chain smoking, drinking coffee, and pounding out these games, and he would actually program the games directly into the monitor, directly into memory on the Apple II. He never had a program that would save his code, his source code. There was no source code or comments. He basically typed it directly into memory. He would type one line, and that line was instantly changed into machine code, and then he would type in the next line, and that's all. There were no symbols, nothing. So he had no source code for anything. And so he had to keep everything in his head, the whole game in his head. And I didn't know that back then, but now it's even crazier that he could do that. And he kept doing that all the way until Secret of Mana. Even with Secret of Mana, he used the same mini assembler built in the Apple II. Totally crazy. But his games were really fast. They looked good, and they really defined Sirius's style. And it was a style that I really liked. I liked the focus on speed. Games that were really fast and they were fun. And he did an amazing job copying Defender with Gorgon, and Autobahn, was a ripoff of Monaco GP, and he just Space Eggs was kind of original, even though it was Galaxian-ish. But but he just made a ton of games, and he did them really fast. He was just just a pro at doing this, and so I loved his stuff. And then the other games that were coming out from Sirius also were just like kick-ass. Mark Turmel's games, Larry Miller's stuff. So these games were coming out, and I was like, that is an awesome company. Sirius is awesome. And they were basically, as far as being a favorite company, them and Origin were my two favorite companies out of all of them. And Origin was all just because of the Ultima series was just amazing. So Nasser was my first superhero guy. And the funny thing is that when I look back at it, id Software really mirrors like what Sirius was the super fast games, trying to do something new, which Sirius was doing something new because Nasser stuff was the earliest fast games on the Apple II. So it was pretty cool that there was almost kind of a parallel there. So Nasser and Bill Budge was amazing. He actually works down the street here. It's not that far away. And Bill's stuff was he didn't make that much stuff, but what he made was brilliant and it was complex. And first of all, just getting Raster Blaster, a pinball simulation with physics and stuff, with multi-ball physics and everything, was hard to do. And he did it. And then he turned it into a construction set, which is really difficult. And and a good UI, a UI that Will Harvey used for music construction set, and I think it was the same UI for the adventure construction set that Stuart Smith did. But yeah, his stuff was brilliant, and he wrote the graphics page articles. That was his column in Soft Talk magazine, and so those articles were brilliant. He was writing about 3D programming, how to optimize your code in 6502, and his stuff was just beyond what most people were doing at that time. He was just like one step ahead. He was also like the first Rockstar game programmer when Trip Hawkins did the We See Farther ad for EA. Bill was like the badass of the group. His stuff was better than all the other people's stuff. Everyone else was awesome, but say Dan Button was awesome. But yeah, Bill Budge was kick-ass. And then it was kind of funny. I really liked Olaf Lubeck's stuff for a while, because I saw his name on a lot of things, and I loved Cannonball Blitz and Jawbreaker and Pegasus 2 and up until Frogger, that Sierra did. Sierra published Frogger. He just did a port of Frogger, which I think John Harris did the Atari 800 version. He just ported it. That was a really, really bad port. That was almost like he just didn't want to do it, but he was forced to or something. And his previous stuff was really good, and I was like, Red Alert, great game, all these games that he had done. Then he did Frogger, and he was done. Like, after Frogger, he was finished. And I tracked him down years later for the Apple II party, and he does not ever want to talk about what he did on the Apple II. Like, doesn't care. Not interested in talking about it. And he programs Cray, he was programming Cray supercomputers back then at the Los Alamos in New Mexico, supercomputer lab or whatever. He was doing that, and he just was not interested in talking about his game programming past, which to me is insane. Like, I can't even understand why someone wouldn't want to talk about the cool games that they made. That's just bizarre. I don't understand programmers like that. So, that kind of sucked. Yeah, I don't even understand that. That it hasn't been common, at least for me, because like when I found all of the Apple II people that I brought that I had come to the party, they were all talking about their games. There was no one there that didn't want to talk about the stuff, the past, and what they did, and answer questions, because I had a bunch of people from Dallas, game developers from Dallas there talking and stuff. and they were all great. I mean, we were doing interviews with them on video for, so I have 6 hours of interviews, and so that was awesome. There was that's exactly what I wanted to hear, was everything that they were talking about. But I guess one-on-one interviews with people, Olaf Lubeck was the only person that I'd met that didn't want to talk about it, and that was like, wow, I really liked your stuff. It it was influential for me. His stuff was influential, but he didn't care. And I don't know, it just seemed weird, that people wouldn't want to talk about their old stuff. In fact, whenever I'm around other people and they don't ask me questions about Doom or Keen, Wolfenstein, Quake, like whatever, they don't ask me questions about that. I wondered, that's kind of weird. I'm right here. You can ask me anything. I got all the answers for those games if you just want to ask, because I will talk about those things. I'll talk about other people's games. I love Star Trek. Yeah. No way. Isn't he the one? He's the one. I'll take you home again, Kathleen. That song. that was. Yeah, that episode was. Yeah, that's where he got in the engine room and he locked himself in the engine room. Yeah, I remember that. That's funny. No, I don't even understand that. Yeah, I know. I mean, oh my God. I can understand, if he's a professor or whatever, and and people know that he's teaching a class to a set of people that he's not going to see again probably after they're out of his room. So it's okay to repeat those same stories because you're telling them to new people all the time in that kind of a setting. So I don't get, I just don't get why people wouldn't talk about the coolest thing they did, because that is the coolest thing he ever did. Whatever he's doing right now, no one gives a shit. The coolest thing he did was he was on Star Trek. If nobody wants to talk to me about like Hyperspace Delivery Boy or Red Faction on the N Gauge or whatever, and they want to talk about Doom and Quake, I will fucking talk about Doom and Quake all day long. Well, Keen was like the first breakthrough. The really cool thing was before. So when I was at Soft Disk, I was there for almost 2 years, right? I was there for like a year and like a month shy of 2 years, I guess, or a month and a half shy of maybe 2 months shy of 2 years. and the whole time I was there, I didn't get to actually make new games. I was porting some of my games over to help the IBM disk, the PC disk. We called it IBM back then. But I wasn't able to make games, and I had to make games. It was like, here's like almost 2 years of me not being able to like just make brand new games, and that was driving me crazy. So I told after a year of working at Softdisk, I talked to the president, and I just told him, I'm going to leave if I can't make games. I'm going to LucasArts. And he's like, whoa, let's let's try and keep you here. So he said, okay, we'll start a game disk. And I'm like, I need 2 months for the games. He's like, okay, we'll do 2 months, because the whole company ran on month cycles. And so 2 months was like, that's like a stretch, but they can do it. And for game development, 2 months, back then for me, it was like, hell yeah, 2 months, awesome. Because I'm not going to be the only one programming. I said I need a team, not just one person, but I need a team of people. I'm going to need another coder, and I'm going to need an artist. And I'm going to need an editor guy to just handle the management stuff that I don't want to deal with, because I just want to code. So he said, okay, 4 people in the room. So it took him several months to get all the internals set up to be able to start making billing and product, getting the name of the thing and marketing it and just all the engine startup that it takes to do that. And so up until that point, I'd been programming my whole life from 79 until 89, right? That's when I got to, well, actually, this was 1990 when I started this disc. So it was 11 years of me by myself coding all the time. And so this was going to be the first time I code with somebody else. So it was going to be the first time I work in a team, which is, for me, I was just could not wait. And I was looking at programming, I was looking at games that people had sent in and submitted to SoftDisk, and I saw this one issue of SoftDisk Apple II. Like in my spare time, I was writing games and selling them to SoftDisk while I have a job at SoftDisk. And I sold them a game called Substalker that I had written in double high res on the Apple II. And on that same disc, they published a game called Tennis by John Carmack, and it was a high res game. And so anyway, I saw the game and I was like, that is some really smooth animation. This guy's a good programmer. I can tell. I mean, I could look at a screen and tell you who wrote a program. Back then I could just look at the screen and say, that is Tony Suzuki who wrote that, or that's Nasser, that's Bill. I could just by the graphic techniques and the movement and stuff, I could say that's Tony Nago that wrote that. Just from knowing the stuff cold. And so looking at John's tennis game, I could tell he was a good programmer. So I was like, this guy is good. Can we get him here? And they said, yeah, we've tried hiring him twice already. He's turned us down 2 times before. So I said, well, let's do it again, because I guarantee he will not say no if it's me interviewing him. And I'll bring Lane into the picture, because Lane, my friend Lane, I had him come in as the editor of that disc. He's hardcore, Apple II and Mac and Apple II GS programmer. So he knew 68K assembly. He knew the Apple II GS. He knew the Apple II. I knew the Commodore 64. I knew the PC assembly, Commodore 64 assembly, Apple II. So each of us knew 3 computers each, with only one of them overlapping. Right? So we knew 5 different computers all together, just us 2. So when Carmack came down and we interviewed him, it was like, blew him away. He was just like, oh my God, I'm going to learn so much stuff if I go there. Because before, the place was empty for him, like nothing. And so now it's like, now he's going to have a badass time. So he accepted the job. He came down for the interview. We interviewed him. He was excited, and he totally took the job and moved his stuff down from Kansas City. And well, back then he was pretty normal. Back then he was pretty normal. As time went on, he became more logical and kind of closed off and not very social. Like his social aspect went away over time as he kind of had to focus more on more complex thoughts, like going into 3D and going into BSPs, and then having to get into shaders and all this, everything that he was learning that was becoming more complex kind of closed him off. But back at the very beginning, he was just like a normal guy like everybody else. I mean, he vandalized the high school, stole stuff, went to juvenile hall. I mean, he was like a normal dude. So when I met him, we would just talk and hang out and stuff, and he was totally normal. And other than being a really good programmer. And so when we finally got together and we started working on stuff, when we got in the same room and we're like, the first issue of that disc that we had to do, because they had waited so long for us to actually be able to start working on something, the problem we had was the first disc that they needed, it had to get done by the end of August, and we were there starting at the beginning of August, so we had 1 month, and they said, we're really sorry to do this to you guys. We know this is on a bi-monthly kind of thing, but for this first disc to really market this thing and blow the doors off of it and all this stuff, we need 2 games in 1 month. Instead of 1 game in 2 months, they need 2 in 1. So it was like, wow, okay, we can do that. It's not going to be new original stuff. It's going to be ports of stuff that we've done, but we can turbo this out. So John decided, while John was there waiting for this whole department to start, he wrote a game called Catacombs on the Apple II and sold it to SoftDisk on the Apple II. And then I had written a game on the Apple II 2 years earlier called Dangerous Dave. And so when we were starting this thing, we both were going to port our Apple II games to the PC. That was what we were going to do the first month, just like no creative anything, just port the thing over, get them done, make the disc, and just get it finished. And we did that. We worked insane hours every day, the entire month, and got those games done. And then when John started to do this, he did Catacombs in CGA, and I was programming my game in CGA, EGA, and VGA. So I'm like, I'm going to take on the ultimate challenge. I'm going to make my game in all 3 video modes, and you can change the video mode anytime while you're playing. You can be jumping in the air and switch video modes. And it's actually, I think, the only game ever on the PC back then that did that. And so while I was writing these, I had this book called Power Graphics Programming by Michael Abrash. And so that book I had, I taught really the hard part, which was the EGA drawing and EGA latch code and stuff. So I basically had that book and I gave it to Carmack and I said, this book has everything in it that you need to know about programming graphics. It's awesome, especially the part where there's the panning registers for EGA for smooth movement. You're going to have to use that for something. So on our next game, John started to use the CRTC address register, which could basically tell the computer where it should start looking in memory to draw the screen. So if you kept on changing the CRTC address register to go down a line, you could have a smooth Xevious scrolling background, right? So the first game he did was that. And we were making these games together, and I was writing the tools and making levels, and he was writing the actual scrolling, the engine, and the movement of the ship and all that kind of stuff. And so that first game was like, wow, this is awesome. This is great being in a team and getting to make all this stuff like really fast. We had 2 months to do it. And then he basically started playing around with the horizontal scrolling, and that's when he did the Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement demo that they had set on my desk. And as soon as I saw the panning on the screen, I was blown away totally. And that was because I knew everything that was on the PC. I knew everything that was there. There was no game that I had not seen on the PC, and everything was very similar to each other. Like, there was nothing breakthrough about what was on the PC at that time. And this is 1990. You know, it's like the PC had been around since '81, and EGA was popular at that time. But for SoftDisk, EGA was too far ahead of their subscribers, right? Their subscribers were CGA people, so that's why Dangerous Dave had to be in CGA for sure, and Catacombs was only in CGA. So you know, here's an EGA trick that the horizontal panning trick was only an EGA trick. The vertical scrolling trick that he was doing was fine for CGA, but the horizontal pan was EGA only. So basically, the cool trick that he did was an EGA only thing, which we could not use at SoftDisk. So we couldn't do it right then, at least. I think we had to convince them. No, we had to do the game in CGA and EGA or something like that. We had to do both modes, and the CGA one was chunky scrolling versus a really smooth panning of EGA. And when I saw the panning, I was just blown away. I mean, I knew it. I saw it right there. Like, this has not happened. This is a Nintendo on the PC. Like, boom, here it is. And so you know, that's when I just said, we're out of here. I just knew SoftDisk could not do jack with this tech. It would be buried, just like everything else that they published. And I knew that this was groundbreaking, and no one had seen it before. And so I just knew, like, this is amazing. Like, before we were in a team environment, John hadn't done any crazy, brilliant stuff, you know, and I hadn't either. But together, when we got in a team environment, here's crazy coolness. So that was basically the start of id Software. Was the day that they made that demo and I saw it. And so Keen was when we got the deal with Scott Miller, because Scott Miller had been trying to contact me for months because he'd seen Pyramids of Egypt, this game that I had written for the Big Blue Disc. He saw that game and he wanted me to make that kind of game for him. Like, can you make that a kind of a clone of that game and make a bunch of levels for it, because it would sell like crazy, and it was similar to I think Pharaoh's Tomb was a game that they had written almost in response to Pyramids of Egypt. Like, here's, John, I said, dude, you don't want to make a copy of that. I mean, there's some way cooler stuff that we could do, because let me show you this. And so I showed him the copyright infringement thing, and that blew him away, because he knows the market. And so he was like, okay, I need a trilogy of games like that, with that scrolling trick. So we said, let's whip up a proposal for you, and and we want $2,000 to show that you're really serious. And so he did. He sent $2,000, and was like, wow, it's on. So we basically, every night and on weekends, we spent all of our time for 3.5 months making the original Commander Keen trilogy, and then we put it out, and it sold like crazy, and we decided to leave Softdisk and start id immediately. But that was a breakthrough game because of the technology, and it was Mario on a PC. And so I have articles and reviews from 1991, from when Keen came out, and I mean, it's back then is the same as like when Doom or Quake or whatever came out. It's just like, oh my god, groundbreaking insanity! This is like the smoothest thing I've ever seen on a PC. Blah 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 blah. But everybody forgets how crazy groundbreaking Keen was. But it was as revolutionary as far as just scrolling tech kind of stuff. It was revolutionary for gaming on the PC, because then a lot of games started appearing with that trick, the scrolling trick. Games definitely. The interesting thing about game development back in the old days was, team efforts really started in like 1985. So pre-85, they were all single programmers. The guy's name's listed on the front of the boxes, a la any book that you go to the bookstore and see. And those programmers, they had their own techniques, they had their own character, they had their own humor, etc. But the other thing that they had was the kinds of games that people wrote on the Apple were different than the games that they wrote on the Atari, and they were different than the games that people wrote on the Commodore. Each of those systems, and this is not counting software that got ported across the board to everything, like a lot of Adventure International stuff or Big Five or
6 o'clock.
Anything that got ported across didn't really count. But the games that were just for the original system, or the ones that were originally written on those systems, were part of almost their own culture on that machine. Games that were on the Atari 800 all feel different than the games that were written on an Apple. And it's not just the API that you had to go through to put stuff on the screen. On the Atari 800, everyone used the player missile graphics to put sound and graphics on the screen. So everyone was going through the same kind of API the way that nowadays everyone goes through DirectX for Windows games, right? Or OpenGL generally. So games looked kind of similar on the Atari 800 because they used the same kind of hardware techniques. There wasn't any like, it wasn't really blue sky back then. They were using the same kind of hardware. On the Apple II, though, all the pixels that you put on the screen, you had to figure out how to put them on the screen because there was no API to write to. It was like, here's a bunch of memory, put pixels, put values in memory, and it shows up on the screen. Versus the Atari, which is set up a bunch of stuff in memory and tell these registers where it's at, and then put it on the screen, and it draws it, and it's very smooth, and it's like very arcade quality stuff. But that all the built-in hardware limited people's expression of their creative thoughts, right? Because they had to put it up there to be smooth. They had to put it up through Atari-dictated hardware and API stuff versus the Apple II, which was WAS dictated color and memory layouts, but no hardware support at all. So you had to be more creative, and that's why on the Apple II I could look at a game on the Apple and tell you that. But on the Atari and the Commodore, it would be harder to tell who did what, because all the games had to go through the same APIs to get on the screen. Okay, so but the games that were written on the Atari were very different than games that were written on the Apple. You know, like Droll and Load Runner, originally written on the Apple. Choplifter and that kind of stuff is very different than like Maxwell Manor and Preppy and Canyon Climber and those kind of games on the Atari, which is very different than Whizball on the Commodore 64 or Impossible Mission and that kind of stuff. They all had their own little design, because when people are on the computer on a certain machine, they stay on that machine back then. Like that was their world, and so their world was made up of whatever games had come already, and that's how they developed their games based off of the previous stuff. Like their ideas and inspirations and culture of gaming was all within that same set of games that they were exposed to, and so everything came from those different like cultures, I guess. And so it was very interesting that when Windows comes out, there's one culture, boom, and there it is, and when it gets to the point of like graphics APIs, and if you're going to make something on the Mac, Windows uses OpenGL, so if you just write for OpenGL, you're supporting both systems, so you don't even see any more Mac-centric game designs the way you used to see Mac-centric game designs from 84 on up, because they did have a lot of games like Continuum and Dark Castle and games like that on the Macintosh that were very Macintosh games. Dark Castle is a very classic Macintosh game. It was just its own thing on that machine back then. Black and white. You had to do things a certain way, and people just made games a certain way on each of these systems. And now that whole thing is gone. It's all gone now. It's been leveled by the OpenGL API and the DirectX 10 APIs, and so now people are doing doing some. Now it's really up to the artwork and the animation and stuff to try and express something. And really, the art style is the biggest thing that comes out, but it's really hard to express even more of the design, quirkiness of design through the game, and with a giant team. With a real small team, you can get to that quirkiness, but quirkiness usually gets ironed out with a bigger team. That's something QA looks at and goes, "What's that?" That needs to be more professional or whatever. Because having a QA team is professional. No, I love them. I mean, I actually I don't feel guilty at all. Like when we had done Wolfenstein, there was the only things that had come out post Wolfenstein during that year in 1993 as well were copies of Wolfenstein, like Ken's Labyrinth and the Fortress of Dr. Radiaki and Isle of the Dead, and just like really bad knockoffs. They were just didn't have that quality level that we had been achieving. And then when we did Doom, and then the Doom clones started coming out, and those were much better. I mean, Dark Forces was an awesome Doom clone. That was actually the first Doom clone that was out, if you don't count Heretic. But that was actually using our engine, and that's why they had a head start. But the reason why Heretic and Hexen were out there was because I wanted to see more games. I wanted to play more shooters, and there was nothing out there that was competitive or of the quality that I would want to play. And because everything had been done by like these shareware guys or some really bad engineers or bad teams, and so I really wanted to see real pro developers making cool 3D stuff. So that's why I got Raven to make these games, so there'd be more out there. And so Heretic, the whole year of '94, post Doom release was us working on Doom 2 and them working on Heretic. And then finally, by the end of the year, October, Doom 2 comes out, Heretic comes out December 23rd, 94. And then in March 9th of 95 is when Dark Forces comes out. And I had seen Dark Forces back in like the summer of '94 when CES was happening in Chicago, and I went to CES to promote Doom 2 for GT. And while I was there, the LucasArts team had come over and said, "We got something we want to show you." And so I went over to their cool booth, and they showed me Dark Forces, a real early version of Dark Forces, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome! I cannot wait to play a Star Wars shooter." So I was always excited to play shooters. I mean, I've never ever wished like, "Oh man, why did I start that?" Or I think it's awesome. I love shooters. Yeah, well, the inspiration for Wolfenstein 3D was Castle Wolfenstein from Silas Warner in 1981, and Muse was his company. Him and Ed Zaron had started that company, and that was a really groundbreaking game back then. I mean, everybody recognized it when it came out, and it actually is like the original stealth game, like the pre-Splinter Cell, type game. It was the original one. And it was a huge impact on me. I mean, I played that game so much. I figured out how to get through every single castle. Every time you ran Wolfenstein, it was a new castle, right? The only thing was that the exits of every single room were the same. It was the contents of the rooms that all changed. So if you knew the layout of the entire castle by exits of rooms, you could just run right through the whole thing, after killing guards and stuff. But you could run through and get to the exit pretty quickly if you had written out the whole layout. That's how much I actually played that game. It was a ton. But it was funny how huge that game was, and it had like one of the most annoying things in the world, which was hitting the wall and the whole screen going crazy, showing low-res graphics and stuff. The low-res graphics was being used for layout of the high-res screen, right? It was like these low-res dots and stuff are used for collision detection on the low-res screen, and the graphics high-res screen echoed, exactly where those things were on the screen, like the walls and doors and stuff like that. But so when it went nuts, it was like Silas was kind of showing you what he was doing with his collision and stuff, but it was annoying, having that sound and that interruption. The game would have been, it would have been even, I don't know, it is kind of weird. I wonder if he, added that in later. I never did ask him, why did you put that damn annoying screen craziness, because maybe he didn't have it in there originally. It was too safe of a game. It didn't rattle you. It didn't scare you, So you were scared of even hitting the walls. But I think, having 9 keys to shoot and 9 keys to move around is already enough nerve-wracking, for just movement and shooting. But that, the game was a huge inspiration, and I played it, of course, until I fully mapped the game out, and I was done with it, kind of. But I mean, it took a lot of plays to get to that point to figure out that there was a pattern and all that stuff. Because there were no books or anything out back then to tell you how to cheat at this stuff. Only like Pac-Man books and stuff. So having to figure that out myself was like, oh, so this is how it works, But still, it was an amazing game, and then in 1991, when we were thinking about what is our next game going to be after we finish our second set of Commander Keen games, because we had just done this 3D game at the same time that we're doing this second set of 3 Commander Keen games. We also had a 3D texture mapped game that we'd written called Catacombs 3D, but it was EGA. It was an EGA, so it was probably the only EGA texture map game ever made, because VGA is so much easier to do stuff in. But that came out definitely earlier than Ultima Underworld, which came out a week before Wolfenstein did. But we had this 3D game, and it was like we're gonna make another one of these for shareware, because we did this one for soft disk, and now we're gonna do it ourselves. We're gonna do a trilogy and all this stuff for Scott. And so one of the ideas that Tom had was, he called it "It's Green and Pissed." That was like the title of the game, and it was like, So it's like a research lab, and the scientists are, experimenting, and there's mutants, and they're killing everybody, and you go in there, and you blast your way out, and all this stuff. And I was just like, man, that is like the oldest story in the book. I totally don't want to play that game. And so I'm just like, why not, like, remake Wolfenstein in 3D? And it was funny, because it was like, Carmack and Tom and I were all like, yeah. Like, it was instantaneous, like, obviously, yes. Why wouldn't we want to do that? That would be amazing. Adrian Carmack never played games before, right? So he had no opinion on that. So we were talking gobbledygook to him. But it was like all three of us immediately knew we had to make that game when I mentioned it. I was like, done. Got it. We know what it is already. We don't even have to like come up with design docs. We already know the game. So that was the inspiration, because we're just like, obviously that game had hit each one of us, all three of us, like hard, a lot early, years earlier, like 10 years earlier. So the funny thing is that the Wolfenstein sequels have been going on approximately a 10-year cycle since it was originally released. And so the next Wolfenstein that came out from Raven had come out almost, another 10 years past the enemy territory, not enemy territory, but the Return to Wolfenstein. So we had the original Wolfenstein, Wolfenstein 3D, Return to Wolfenstein, and then the new Wolfenstein. Every 10 years almost. It's pretty. There is no other game that has done that has gone on for that long, with that many sequels, with that one franchise. I thought that was a turning point for id, really. It was a turning point because it was fast, and it was violent, and the sound was awesome. It was our first digitized sound coming out of a Sound Blaster instead of ad-lib sounds. So we had a bunch of new stuff coming out with Wolfenstein. We had 3D texture mapping in VGA. First, 3D texture mapping for us, it was the second game that we'd done that in, but now it was in VGA. So it was like we were doing a new graphics mode, our very first VGA game with the texture mapping. It was our first gun game where we were actually shooting with guns and not like with a wizard's hand or a tank turret or whatever. It was like, this is the first-person shooter, definition here. The gun, the key controls that I had set up for Wolfenstein were the first FPS key controls. And the sound and the violence and the speed. All of those things were just, back then, those were huge. Every one of those things was a huge increase in entertainment back then on a PC. Like, nobody had that game was 70 frames a second, and that was extremely fast, And so a 70 frame a second game, that's in VGA, that is 3D texture mapping, that's violent. It was just like, wow. I was really proud of it, because it was like, this is what I've always. This is the kind of game that I've always wanted to play. So, we knew what Wolfenstein was. I mean, because it was a pretty simple game design. It was more complex as we were making it, and then we had to scale it back, because we defined, as we're making the game, we did define the core of the game had to be speed. Like, that had to be the core. Anything that slowed us down from that, we had to remove it. So the core, we kept true to the core. So we did throw in other code for dragging dead bodies and searching through bodies and stuff like that, but that stopped you from doing the killing, right? It stopped you from mowing shit down. So it was like, get rid of that stuff. Make it dead simple. All people needed, first of all, people are now in 3D. It's going to be hard enough just to figure out how to use a mouse in 3D and the keyboard at the same time and stuff. Because before, all of our games were just pure keyboard stuff. Alt and Control and space, and the arrows. So that was like that was everything that we had done with the Keen stuff. And so now it's like, okay, now it's 3D. Now we need to have our keys do this. Number keys for the weapons, and all this other stuff. And it's enough that people are now in 3D, that we need to keep it very simple. So the game design needs to just be something they don't even have to think about. They just need to worry about the experience of what's around the corner or what happens when I open the door and I just mow everything down that I see. There's no one safe. Like in Hover Tank, we had made characters that were safe. We had the scary monsters in Hover Tank, and then we had the people that you needed to rescue. And you could mow them down, but that was useless. I mean, you're killing these people you needed to save to get more money to get them to the next level. So it wasn't pure simplicity like Wolfenstein, which was just destroy everything and do it really fast, you know? So I think boiling everything down to that was really important, that we got rid of any of these pauses, because it would be a pause if you had to. It would be a slower game and a pause if you did have safe characters that you couldn't just mow down. So removing all of that and just a blastathon through this fast castle ended up being the best way to keep the core, you know, as pure as possible. So yeah, I was really proud of that game because we were technically the best thing out, and design-wise, we were very clean. It was a very clean, simple design that didn't complicate what the player would want to do, like when they're in there. So even though it was simple by a lot of thought. You know, it wasn't just, I mean, it was more complex than that, and we had to pull it all back out. No, because Wolfenstein was like, here's the new definition of our company, you know, and because that game, the way I feel when I'm playing Wolfenstein compared to the way I feel when I'm playing Keen is night and day. Keen is a fun, happy, safe game that the only time I feel any fear in the game is when I'm in a really difficult spot and I might fall off something, you know, and go boom, 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 boom off the screen. Like that's, you know, very different than a chain gun mowing down a screaming Nazi, you know, and you're doing it really fast. That feeling in Wolfenstein was what I wanted to get out of a game. I was like, that's what we're talking about right there, and we need to do it better. So Wolfenstein was the redefinition, like, this is what it is. It was not the happy, fun play game, you know, like the happy, fun Mario clone type company. It was meant for something else. And so when we found it with Wolfenstein, we decided to perfect it with Doom. So the thing about Doom, you know, Quake did not have this feeling, but Doom had this feeling that it was pretty, you know, it took a year to make that game, and that's really fast. And that was 6 people making that game. And the thing about Doom was, in January of '93, when we started working on it, we put a press release out saying everything that was going to be in the game. We told everybody, this is Doom, and it'll be out at the end of the year. And we put down on a press release everything that we're going to do, and we hadn't done any of it yet. You know, and it's all groundbreaking, everything. Everything was groundbreaking, but we knew that we could do it. It was almost like it was going to happen and we were going to do it. And it was like predetermined almost. And so while we were making the game, it wasn't like it was, I mean, we did have challenges during the game with, first of all, the engine being fast enough. And the engine, actually, when Carmack started writing the engine, it was fast enough because our level design at the very beginning, mainly with Tom, because I was writing the tool to make the levels, and Tom was the one making levels, but he wasn't really inspired. Tom was already not happy because Tom is not a kill kind of guy. Tom is Keen, right? And Tom is not Doom or Wolfenstein. So he was not inspired already. And while we were making the game, and Tom was making his levels, first he was making them like Wolfenstein levels, you know, but it had diminished lighting built into the engine, so it did get kind of darker and everything. But it was the same floor and ceiling height in square walls, you know, and it was mainly done that way because the story that we'd come up with was basically are in military bases, and you know, this is what hallways and rooms look like. They're right angles, you know. and so the level design just wasn't really inspired, and it felt like we were still in Wolfenstein, but it looked better. Like the lighting looked cooler, and the textures that we had were cooler because it was not going to be a, Adrian had gone from the primary colors of Wolfenstein into Doom with, like, I'm going to completely redo the way that I do textures. I'm getting away from the clean look with Wolfenstein, and I'm going to make a dirty look with Doom. The whole, because it was like, this is a space base, and we basically said, you know what, Adrian, Star Wars was a really successful movie, and one of the really key things about Star Wars was it looked used. It was space that had been used. It wasn't clean and shiny. So we need our base to reflect Star Wars's used feel that Lucas had come up with. Like, that was really important to the believability of the space. So that's what Adrian did. He's like, I'm going to make a used looking space station, slime and dirt and all that kind of stuff. So that was really important to get that part down. And then when Tom had these issues with trying to come up with something, I mean, and Carmack had told him, hey, get some books on military buildings. Get some architecture books on military building and try and make those. And Tom did, and they were boring because they were military buildings. And so he just wasn't, first of all, the subject matter was not exciting, and then he's making levels that are not exciting. And so the whole project for him was just like non-exciting, not very happy. And so I decided I'd gotten the level editor to a point where I could start using it for making levels, So I basically said, okay, I'm going to try and work on this and straighten out this level thing. I want to solve this problem. It needs to have a look that doesn't look like Wolfenstein. Like, every game that we make can't look like the previous game. It's got to be something new and better. So I played around. I looked at all the variables I had. I had light values. I had floors and ceilings. It could be whatever height and lighting, and I could do things with lights. I could make them blink, and I could do, whatever I wanted with them. And so, at the very beginning of making Doom, the concept of a middle texture not being there to create windows was like a weird thing for us to try and grok and understand how that worked, because, like, none of this stuff existed before us. So we're trying to figure out, like, Carmack had written his code in an extremely optimized way to allow this one extra little thing. It was a top texture, mid texture, and a bottom texture, and that's all we needed, right? That was like, that's all you get. And you can make it so it does or doesn't draw that middle texture, and if it doesn't, then you have like a window. So it's like, in a sector is an enclosed area that has a floor and a ceiling and a light value. That's it. So he came up with some very basic data structures, but those data structures were all that we could. That's what the level editor used, right, to create the levels, and that's all we had. And so my challenge was to try and figure out what is going to be cool for me to look at when I'm making these levels. I mean, all I got is Wolfenstein. That's the most advanced thing that's out there, but we can't look like Wolfenstein. It's got to look really cool. And I mean, it already looked cool just making a Wolfenstein-looking level, so I knew that we could do something. So I really started playing around with making really, really high areas, and then putting, like, balconies up inside the walls, kind of recessed in the walls, and so I made a room that ended up being in E1M2. So in E1M2, when you start the game, you're in one area that's got like a building in the center, and there's a red keycard door to the left that you can open, and if you go straight and you kind of curve up the stairs, you go into a room that has almost like a zigzag path through slime, and if you go through that slime path, you can take a platform down and you go into a room, and that's the room that I made. That was like the first room that was the Doom look. And so that room, when I made that room, I basically got Kevin and Adrian, because of the art guys and stuff, and I said, whoa, dudes, come in here and check this out. I think this looks pretty cool. And I had played around with stairs and stuff leading up to that room, so I was like making some stairs and changing light values and making some recessed stuff, and then I was like trying to demonstrate the contrast of experience while you go from a closed-in area that they had seen before with a Wolfenstein feel, going down a hallway, and then all of a sudden you're going, up some stairs, and that was different. Whoa, stairs, 8 pixel high stairs. And so we go up these stairs, and all of a sudden the room opens up into this huge thing. And so like I come up the stairs, and they're used to that feel of the ceiling and stuff. And I come up into the room, and they're like, whoa. And I'm like, that's what we're talking about, And I had not used any straight walls. That room had angles in the walls, right? So I didn't have anything straight. The thing that I had showed them was a hallway that did a curve. So it was a curving hallway with stairs going up it, and then into a room that was huge that had that had angles all in it. And so that was like a demonstration of like, this could not be made in Wolfenstein, and it looks really cool. And so they saw it and they got it immediately, and then I knew, yes, that's what I'm looking for, that reaction. And Carmack saw it too, and he's like, yeah. So that right there was the definition of what Doom-style level design was going to be, and it was going to go crazy off of that. It was like, forget anything that you thought about any buildings and forget about Wolfenstein, and just play with these values for heights and stuff, and curves, and don't be afraid of how many line segments you have to make a complex area. It's like, it's worth it because it's going to look really awesome. And then starting to hide stuff, secrets, and secrets have been a part of our game since we started making them. So secrets had to be in there, and we figured out how to do secrets as well. So the game development had happened pretty quickly because the Doom engine, after the first 2 months, we could start making stuff in there. And after in probably month 4 was when I defined that look of the Doom look. 4 or 5. I think it was 4. And at that point, the guys are, Adrian and Kevin are making the Baron of Hell and the Doom Marine and the Imp. And so they got the Cacodemons. They got the basic monsters in there. And got some, I think it was silent at the very beginning. It was really a quiet game at the very beginning until we got Bobby to send us some sounds and stuff. And that really changed things when we got the sounds. But the really interesting thing about Doom was it was shaping up so well, so quickly. Tom was not excited about it, and I think he just felt bad that he didn't get the whole Doom. I mean, he got it when he saw the Doom level design stuff, but I think he was upset that he didn't come up with it. And he just wasn't excited about the content of the game and stuff. So he left in, I believe, August of '93, and then we brought Sandy Peterson on to basically make the levels in the game, episodes 2 and 3, because I made episode 1. So things were coming together so well that the game, and this is the only game that I've ever felt like the emergent behavior of the monsters in the game, the way that the monsters worked was not really predictable. The way that they wandered and the way that they found you. The way that they attacked you was, right? But the things that they would do, like we wanted to add some unpredictability by having them attack each other. If one monster of a different type hit another one, they get mad and they start fighting each other, and it's like, yeah, that's what demons would do. They'll just kill anything, right? So putting that in there was another like, whoa, that's awesome. And then the wandering sounds, right? But the interesting thing about making levels in the game was even if you made a level, you didn't. The game always had some kind of mystery to it, like you really don't know everything that's happening. Like even though you put that stuff in there, the game comes alive when it runs, right? There's like the static level on the screen in the level editor, but then the game, when it comes alive and the AI is working and you're just taking in the environment and the music and the sound effects and stuff, it's like it was like the first game that really came alive out of any game that I ever made, and it felt mysterious, like, wow, this place is really crazy, and even if I made the level, the things that they did was not like other games, so that was really interesting too. And especially if you played someone else's level that they'd made, the mystery really hits. It's not really predictable. you don't know what someone's going to do, because you could set up all kinds of traps. You could never trap people in Wolfenstein. The door opens and here comes a guy. But in Doom we had sound flooding, and that helped the mystery, because if you have a window somewhere between multiple areas, when you shot a sound, you're inside of a sector. The player's inside of a sector. Sectors that are touching through two line segments will connect the sound and flood the sound to the next sector. So when you shoot something, wherever that sound floods, if it's bounded by doors, two-sided segments that are closed. If there's no opening, the sound remains bound in that area. But if there is an opening connected, the sound will flood and it'll trigger the activation of the monsters. So we use sound triggers to activate. And we did that in Wolfenstein in a similar way. But with Doom, because of the crazy layouts of the levels, in Wolfenstein we had closed doors everywhere. So the sound flooding was very predictable. You open up in Wolfenstein, when you opened up a door, the floor that you were on connected to the floor of the room that you just opened in a logical sense in the game. So if you make a sound, anything that you make, any sound you make in the room or outside the room is like making it in the same place. So you will alert anything in the connected sound areas, and those sound areas are connected in real time and then cut off in real time. And then in Doom, it was sound flooding wherever you're at. It would flow through. If the door was closing, if it closed all the way and you shot, nothing would happen. But if you opened it and shot, everything would hear it past the door. So we were doing all of these new things with the AI and sound and stuff that the game just felt unpredictable. It was like a mysterious, unpredictable game that, like, when you made the level and it came alive, it was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. The game just very, very different than Wolfenstein, and it was like, it was pretty much, that was the game that I'd always wanted to play. There was always like the holy grail game, like, if there could be a perfect game out there, it would have this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. But that game, but Doom was like, it satisfied everything, and you never knew that could exist. So it was better than any game that I ever thought that I wanted to play. It went beyond any of those games, and it was like, I like a game that's like, it felt like it was unknowable in the early days, and now it's completely been taken apart into little pieces, and it's not mysterious anymore. But when the game first came out, it was extremely mysterious, and so that, I think, really helped. It really helped the game, and it wasn't mysterious in you're sitting in the middle of a room and it's suspenseful and you're wondering what's going on. It was mysterious in, sure, a suspenseful way, but also in a crazy action way. It was mysterious while stuff was happening to you. So, Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, we knew that we had made the best game ever. I mean, we knew because we were gamers, and we knew that we were making new technology. Multiplayer was just insane. It's still my favorite multiplayer game of all time because of the simplicity of control and the speed of that game. It's still my favorite. There's nothing that feels that way. But yeah, for everything to come together, and it was almost like it was just predestined because it just happened so well while we were making it. It took a lot of work, but we never hit something that we couldn't solve. In fact, almost a case in point, the last bug that we had in Doom was the most mind-stumping bug that we had, but we only had that bug for 2 days. and the thing about that was, the game, when we were doing our final burn-in tests on it and just running it on everybody's machine in the office to see what would happen if it ran. Yeah, I mean, it was like, we looked at Nintendo for everything, right? We looked at Nintendo's design and their quality and all of that stuff to gauge our own quality against. So the thing about Nintendo games is you can leave them plugged into a cartridge and they will run forever because they had their Q&A process down to a science. I mean, they would not let any game come out if it had a glitch on the screen, So that was what we wanted to do, and we didn't have a QA team at id. We were QA. The developers were the QA team, so that didn't exist. So as precise as we were with our programming and as advanced as we were with our design and everything, we used all of that on testing our game as well. And so we left the game running on everybody's computers just to see if anything would happen. We don't want that Nintendo glitch kind of issue to come up, because it needs to be fixed. Can't be one single thing wrong. And randomly, computers would lock up forever. Seemingly forever. They would just the game would be running in demo mode, and during the demo loop somewhere it would just freeze everything. And it was just whoa, what is going on? This is really nuts. And it was random. It wasn't like it was at any specific time. And Carmack was trying to nail it down, what could be stopping the game from running, And he finally found out what it was, and it ended up being we were using the timer chip in the PC to time the refresh, how fast the game should run. The game simulation part of the game ran at 10 frames a second, and the refresh of the screen was at 35 frames a second. It was just half of Wolfenstein's, but it ensured that it was going to run at that frame rate at 35. And what was happening was the timer chip in the PCs. They would have you can set that timer chip to be a certain number, right? And it would just time like crazy. And if you set it to 0, it would time out to 4 billion, in days. So, that's not really an issue. But yeah, we didn't want to have our game locking up. And what happened was, when the game was running, we never did clear the timer chip value. So it was at some random number, and whenever it flipped over from all the FFFFF over to 0, that's when the game froze, because it was looking for a bigger number than that, and there wasn't one. It was a lower number, so you're locked in this check that's not going to happen again ever. So Carmack simply fixed it by zeroing that out at the beginning of when the game ran, and then every once in a while just zero it at the beginning of, I guess, the level load or something, and that fixed it. And so that was, it was only a 2-day bug, but that was a crazy, insidious bug. We had one on Quake that was pretty crazy as well. But it was of course we're going to fix that bug. This game is going to come out, has to come out. We made it this year. We started it in January. It's going to come out in December. Nope, I don't think so. So Quake was a hard game to make. Quake was, that was that game. Up until that point, we had made Commander Keen. The first Keen that we made took 3 months. The first series. Second series took us 6 months. That was a long time, but during that 6 months, we were making other games as well, right? Because we were helping Softisk out. So we made 3 other games while we were making those, and so. The time could have been shorter, But then Wolfenstein happens, and we take 6 months to do Wolfenstein. So we doubled our development time. Then we make Doom, and it doubles it again to a year. And so we start working on Quake, and after a year of Quake, that year is the hardest year, pretty much, because... It's the hardest year on the team because, first of all, with Doom, even with Wolfenstein and Doom, after 2 months we could start making a game. The engine ran. We could make levels and we could just do it, right? With Quake, the engine wasn't ready to make a game for a year. So during that year, we always thought it was going to happen, at some point, right? And I basically wrote QuakeEd, the editor, just like I had done for Doom and everything before that. I wrote every editor that we had. And so I worked on QuakeEd, and at the same time, I was exploring Quake level design, just like the Doom stuff. What is it going to look like? What are the rules that we should be following? But it wasn't just me and John. I mean, we had a team of other people in the company. We had 9 people working on Quake, and those people had never been through a game cycle from the beginning, except for the people that were on Doom. And that was me and John and Adrian and Kevin. That was it. Those were the only ones that had been on the previous one from the beginning, because Sandy came in halfway through, and Dave Taylor came in halfway through. So nobody had been there, right, for a whole thing. Like, here's what it takes to make a groundbreaking technology and a groundbreaking game design. Boom, go. So they didn't know what it was like. And so it was really hard on them when it went past the point of sanity of how long do we keep on working on stuff that we have to keep throwing away? You know, like American kept on making level after level for Carmack's engine to test stuff and having to throw them away constantly, you know. Write code in the scripting language and then throw it away because we just redid the scripting language, or, you know, that kind of stuff. And so after writing the editor and making it so he could be working on stuff for Carmack, and I was exploring design, I was also working on a lot of other stuff. I was working on Hexen, I was working on the Ultimate Doom, I was working on concepts, I was working on, I guess, Strife was another game that we were making, you know, that we were helping to having created by Rogue, and then just other business stuff. Not to mention all of the explosion of what happened with Doom and dealing with that stuff, right? And so I was doing all of that so Carmack and the other guys could focus on figuring out what Quake was going to be like. And that year of no game design and all technical work was really hard on everybody, right? I mean, there was a point in time where American was just like, you know what, I'm just not excited about these Aztec textures, because the I think it was Adrian who had made a whole bunch of textures for Aztec, because we thought that we'd have an Aztec section in there, and then it was just like, you know, American's just not feeling it, and I had to go in and tell Adrian, we gotta just nuke all those textures, we can't use them, we're gonna have to come up with a new theme that American can feel, you know. So, you know, that was a hit in just like inspiration and trying to make something happen when we didn't have a gameplay programmer to try and make gameplay, because the only coders we had were the people trying to make the technology of the game. So, because Carmack didn't want to grow the team, he didn't want to make a company too big, we didn't hire other people, you know, and I'm handling a whole bunch of other stuff, so I couldn't do it. So, it was really hard on everybody that we were trying to make a game at the same time we're making technology that's not even ready yet. And so after a year of doing that, the engine was was ready to go, but everyone was mentally like busted. So so at the time, you know, we had a big meeting. It's like, okay, the game is ready to be made, and they're like, I'm like, okay, now we can put in all of the world-class effort that it takes to make an awesome game design on an awesome engine that you just finished, and everyone else is like, we are done. Mentally, we're finished. We can't even think of a new game design. We just want to finish this thing and crawl under a rock. And I was disappointed in that. You know, I was really wanting to do a really awesome new game design, and Carmack was on the fence, and Adrian was also on the fence. But everybody could see how snapped the people who had never been on a thing from the very first, you know, day, what kind of a toll it took on everybody, that we were not maybe halfway there, you know, like the engine's not ready. Can you make an awesome game? No, I can't even think anymore. So anyway, that was really hard. And when that happened, when that decision of, you know what, let's just slap Doom weapons in this engine and call it a game. You know, when we all had that long talk that one day, I was just like, you know what, this isn't the same place anymore. We used to all know what we were going to do, and now there's doubt because the new people have never done this before, these new elements, you know, in id, and it's not the same place. So I was basically going to be done. After Quake was done, I was done. So I said, all right, I will redesign the game, put Doom weapons in. We're going to make a really great game with Doom weapons in the game, but it's not the next level that I was hoping for. And let's do it as fast as we can. And that's what we did. And that was in November when we had that meeting. And in January, I had called up Tom Hall and I said, when Quake's over, I'm out of here. We're going to start another company. And so Tom's like, okay, I'm working on Prey, and I'll just I'll just stop after you're out of there. So I worked for 7 months on Quake, all the way to the very end, 7 days a week. It was insane work to make a game. Even if it was just a clone of Doom weapons and stuff, it was still hard work to make a really quality game out of it. But we did, on June 22nd. That was a Saturday of '96, and everyone was so broken that the last month of making Quake, American wasn't even in the company. I mean, he left. We didn't even know where he was. He just couldn't get a hold of him, didn't know where he was at or anything. He just snapped. And so I had to have Tim Willits finish all his work that American had half finished, and then I had to do a lot of sound work on it, and then the day that I put the game on the net, nobody was even at work. They were all just busted at home. And I went up there on Saturday, and I'm just like, all right, I'm going to put this thing together. I got all the files, and I'm going to have to find a new program to compress and extract, because the stuff that we were using before would not do a subdirectory, because this was the first id game with a subdirectory, the id1 folder. So I found LHA, and then LHA was super cryptic with its stupid command line options. It was not clear because it was written by a guy in France. So I basically put it all together and put it out on the net, pretty much by myself. Everyone was broken. So anyway, they loved it. In February, we had put out a thing called Q-Test, and that was a test of Quake's multiplayer capability to see if people liked it, And so that was the first huge thing. And when we were making Doom, people knew that Doom was coming. From Wolfenstein, that had ignited everybody, Doom was something people were waiting for, and Usenet groups were full of people talking about Doom. They were inventing what Doom would be. They were making games like, SpizzPopD, smashing pumpkins in small piles of putrid debris. People were doing all kinds of stuff with Doom. With Quake, it was even bigger than that. Because we'd already proven what we could do with Wolfenstein, we had reproven it with Doom, and they had faith that Quake was going to be it. There was no doubt, right? So there was a ton of stuff around Quake before it got released. So IRC was crazy with it. And so I got on IRC knowing that it was going to be pretty much just splitting constantly when I got on there to tell everybody it's coming out today. And so I did that. I got on IRC and I told everyone it's coming out. Quake is going to be uploaded today. And it was just huge nuke. And I spent, from the time I told people, it took probably about 6 hours for me to make sure the whole thing was perfect install, perfect packaging, good download, all that kind of stuff. It took about 6 hours to get it together, and then put it up on the net, and it just went nuts. Everyone went nuts, but it was very symbolic of the end of the era at id, putting that game up. It was a hard one to put up. Which one? Oh, Daikatana? Yeah, Daikatana was Daikatana. Oh, so Quake took 18 months, right? So that was another half a year to Doom schedule kind of thing. It was 18 months, and Daikatana took almost 3 years. So it doubled that, right? And that was, I'd say that Daikatana was more fun to make than Quake, because I didn't have any creative issues with any. There were no creative issues on Daikatana. It was my game, clear and simple. So there was nothing like on Quake where I would have to I just lost faith in everything because we had to just slap Doom weapons in there. So Daikatana was the cool new thing that I wanted to do with Quake for game design was something I knew that we could do. We were used to pushing all the boundaries and everything. With Daikatana, I still made a shooter formula type game, because to me the risk of making a game like what I thought the original Quake would be was a much bigger risk for a brand new company than making a traditional shooter type game. Like, to me, I'd rather not take a big risk on the first game and make something more traditional, but still incrementally push FPS forward, but not do the crazy revolutionary idea that Quake would have been. So, so that's why Daikatana was still a traditional shooter-looking game, but with a bunch of innovative stuff that, you know, trying to put the innovation in there. If it's not done well, you know, you can get, like the sidekicks, you can get knocked for it. If you're a person who, first of all, made a mistake, you can call it a mistake, that, you know, making Daikatana an expert level FPS, because I wanted the game to be challenging to me, and I wasn't really concerned with people who weren't really good at the game. So it was designed to be hard, and that is not a good mass market design at all. But for people who want an expert FPS, it is a tough game, and it's really fun to play. And if you can work with the sidekicks and try and understand how they work and how to control them and stuff, then you don't have any issues with them, because you know how they work. You figured them out. But if you are someone who doesn't want to figure out sidekicks, that you just want them to work, then it's frustrating to play the game. You know, if you want to, if you play Ghost Recon on the PC and you have your guys, that was a very safe design for those sidekicks, because those guys did not jump. They were locked to the ground like you were. There was no jump in Ghost Recon. The guys moved very slowly. You know, that was a really safe design, and it came off really well. It was executed very, very well. With Daikatana, I was trying to make sidekicks that could do what I could do in the game. The way that I jump and do everything, I want my sidekicks doing that, and that kind of programming is hard to do. And so sometimes they didn't pull it off right, you know, and sometimes they would be killed by doors and dumb stuff like that. But Daikatana was more fun to make than Quake was. Sure, it took two times as long, but that's 2 times as long factoring in the fact that we created a 120-person company and we're making 4 games at once, and I hired a bunch of people that never made games before. They'd made mods, but they'd never made games. So all of those challenges, you know, all of those challenges on top of each other, it's going to take longer to make something. And then with my team leaving halfway through, that doesn't help either, right? And the team leaving issue was all tied up really in all these internal politics that were happening that I didn't want to have any part of, because I just want to make a game. So all the internal politics were not anything that Tom and I had focused on or were part of, right? But the internal politics affected the teams. And the team, you know, my team decided to, you know, half my team decided to walk out. So I had to get just other people in the company that should never have been there in any position of power that were being super subversive. And, you know, I don't want to go into detail, because the last thing I want is to, you know, kick up the dirt on specific people and specific things, and have to defend against lawsuits or whatever. But there was a bunch of internal stuff that never should have happened. You know, if everyone was focused on making games, it never would have happened. And so me trying to deal with being the, you know, the CEO of this big company, making 4 games with the Austin office, with you know, Warren Spector making Deus Ex down there, to 3 games that we're making up in Dallas. I could not. It was the first game that I had not actually made with my own hands. Right, I designed it, but I didn't execute it. It was a team of people that had never made a game before that was executing my game. So after enough of it had been made and enough had gotten to a stage where it seemed like this was probably what it was going to settle into, And then I went in and I started polishing it all and cleaning it up. But it was not my original designs that people are seeing, but they're seeing all of my polish in the game. Because when you've never made a game before, if you don't know how to polish a game, it's bad shareware, basically. So I did do a lot of work on just straightening the thing out. But that game was more fun. But obviously the PR and the press stuff was not fun. And unfortunately, huh? Yeah. John Romero's about to make you his bitch, is what it said. Well, the person who was my marketing guy at the time, we had already made our deal with IDOS, before he came on board. I already had a deal. I mean, here it is. We're making these many games. This is how much money we got. Boom, we're going. And so, don't worry about marketing yet because the game's not going to be out for a while. But being a marketing guy, all he wanted to do was market. And so, if he couldn't market the games, he's going to start marketing the people. So he basically was marketing himself. So he was making ads with just us, founders of the company, in the magazines, like CGW and stuff. Just like, here's Iron Storm, suck it down, And so he's like putting ads out of like image ads, and just spinning because there was nothing for him to do but try and get a rise out of people. Try and show the people Iron Storm is here and we're going to kick your ass. And so with Daikatana, he basically had our ad agency do something really aggressive, and he thought it was awesome when he got shown the thing, and he showed it to me, and I'm like, I would never say that to anybody. He's like, John Romero's about to make you his bitch. He goes, and I'm just like, okay, first of all, I've never called anyone my bitch in my whole life, and I never will because that is gay. That is not me. I would say I'm going to kick your ass, or I'm going to blow your head apart, or whatever. I'm going to do something to you, but I'm not going to make you my bitch. I'm not going to have sex with you. So I would never say that. And he's just like, come on, it's funny. Don't be a pussy. And I'm just like, look, it's your job. Do whatever. But I really should have not done that. I should have said, no way in hell are you putting that out. Because that basically ruined my connection with the fans and the community. That was, calling them bitches, basically. And that's not anything that I ever wanted to do. And I didn't do it, but that's what it looks like. So I have to take responsibility for letting it out. Huh? No, I did get angry emails from fans, but the angry forum posts and the the sites ripping on me and Ion Storm. I mean, really, up until that ad, really all the way until the end of '97, we had not seen anything bad. But as soon as I fired him, the year of 1998 saw all the bad stuff happening. Right, all of the Bitch X and Evil Avatar and Fat Babies and all those sites all came into existence. They were all ripping on us. People inside the company that hated some of the people in the company, some of the founders in the company, posted all of the internal whatevers. The people that we got rid of on the outside were trying to destroy us, and that year of '98 ripped half my team out. So it was all sabotage all over the place. That's what all the stuff happened, was all sabotage, and there it is. That's what happened. But it was still more fun than Quake to make. I think that women are just as diverse as men in playing games, and some women get FPSs, like they totally understand it, but a lot of them don't. Right, a lot of women don't want that intense focus and dedication that it takes to be really good at playing FPSs, but some do. And if you go to any of these CPL events or professional gaming, cyber gaming type events, you'll see women all over the place. There's a lot of women. I mean, one of the best death matchers in the world is female. Her name is Cornelia. She lives in LA, and she's been a top game deathmatcher for years, since Quake, and she will destroy any guy. Basically, like the graphic card companies like Nvidia or ATI, they have her go to their booth, and she just sits there all day long playing the latest shooter, whatever it is, Quake 4 this last time, and basically taking on any guy that comes up, and she will just destroy him. There's no one can even come close. She is really, really good. I mean, no, she will destroy me. She is really, I'm telling you, she's at the level. There's a level of playing games. Games are so well done, so well programmed nowadays, that there can now exist a wide range of ability and skill inside of a game like an FPS. There is a separation between people who are really good and then the pros. You know, just like professional sports, you know, the people play basketball all over the world, you know, but there's a level where they recognize that guy is supernatural. That guy is not like any of us. He is going to move up to the next level, right? And so that totally exists in gaming, in FPS gaming, and, you know, really RTSs and all these other, you know, anything that you can that requires skill, and it requires psychology, and it requires strategy. And games nowadays incorporate all these elements can happen. You know, when you have to map someone else's brain, when you're playing in the game and you're having to map another player's brain to figure out their patterns and stuff, that's where it gets really, really exciting, you know. And there are plenty of women. I mean, they've had just female tournaments, Queen of the Hill tournaments, etc. There's tournaments of just women playing deathmatch, you know. And there's tons of them out there. There's Counter-Strike teams. There's the Frag Dolls. You've seen them from Ubisoft. There are a lot of shooter women players, but it's not like the wide range of Farmville type people. You know, it is a subculture, but it's not a male only subculture. You know, there's a lot of women there, and there are a lot of very good women, not just some that haven't reached the next level. But yeah, there are players. When you've played a player who is professional that has reached that next level, and you think you're really good, you're about to see that it's a different game. I haven't really heard any. I mean, Stevie would do that. My girlfriend back then, she would do that. She was awesome. She would beat me all the time. And she was very, very good. And we would trash talk all the time because we knew each other really well. But in a public setting, I don't think that women, you know, most guys wouldn't. I mean, I would. I mean, I did back in the Doom days. I would, you know, startle everybody by calling them names while we're deathmatching because no one had ever done that before, and it was like psychological advantage. Well, yeah, the whole game is violent. The game is violent. I mean, if you are playing a really good game of deathmatch in anything, you know, you're going to want to destroy something if you get killed around you. Right? And if you're going to destroy something, you're probably going to yell too. You know, so you probably want to yell at the guy who just killed you. So, yeah, I mean, these games can be very intense, and the reactions from that intensity are all over the place, including trash talking and stuff. Yep. Yeah. Well, if you're playing on a PvP server, you know, and you're playing like Battlegrounds, that's, you know, Battlegrounds is the interesting thing between World PvP, Battlegrounds, and Arena is they're all very different. The World PvP, though, is the most unexpected one, right? Because Battlegrounds and Arena, you're expected to kill the other players, right? But in World PvP, it's not necessarily something that you're expecting, you know? And to me, that's the most exciting PvP because it's not in this controlled environment. It's like I can go and destroy a whole village if I want and wait for the 80s to roll in, you know? And that is really fun. Not knowing how good the other guy is unless you can actually see his gear and he's all, you know, resilient and stout or whatever. But it's fun. It's I like the unexpected World PvP more than the other PvP. I play WoW like every day. Well, I have 10 characters. 5 of them are 80s, and I have 2 70 pluses, and then the others are lower level, like 40 and stuff like that. But my plan is to try try and by Cataclysm get them 10 80s, and then they can all go up to 85. So I've maxed gear on 3 of my mains. 3 of my 580s are all maxed out on their dual spec gear, and so I'm Alliance. I'm totally Alliance. I'm not a Horde. I don't. That's the thing about a Horde is I just didn't like the models. I didn't like the Horde models, but I didn't. I mean, I would be a Horde if I thought. No, when they put the Blood Elves in there, I thought that was cool. They actually look pretty good, right? But they're mixed in with a bunch of other ugly guys, so so it wasn't like a big win for me. So I like the Alliance areas. I just like with Horde, Undead was my favorite starting place. I didn't like Trolls and Orcs because it was all just desert crap. I hate deserts in any game, and so with Alliance, starting out as a Draenei or a Night Elf or a human, you're always in a really cool setting, a really nice area. And the human area is the best designed one because that was the one that they targeted as the one most people would start a character in. So the ramp and the quest design and the settings and all that stuff are better designed than the other areas. So what I do is sometimes, if I've made a new alt and it's not a human, I will get them to the human area as fast as I can to level them in the human area because I've already done all the Draenei stuff and all the Night Elf stuff, etc. Nobody knows. Nope. No, I never tell anybody anything. Nobody on there knows. Yeah, yeah. Nobody knows. I don't sit there talking. I mean, I'm just concerned about playing well, But I mean, now it's easy. Massively geared out with a huge gear score on my characters and stuff. It's easy to instance and stuff. But I never. The only time I've told anybody who I was when I got into a guild and I was in it and they were really cool, and then I could tell them. But it's only happened maybe a couple times in playing the game almost 5 years. I'm all of them. I have 2 tanks and 2 healers, and the rest DPS. That's out of my 580s. And I love healing more than tanking, but I don't have an issue with tanking. I got really good gear for tanking. If I want to instance immediately, I will go in as a tank because the random dungeons will get me in queue immediately because everybody needs tanks. I have a priest healer and a pally healer, and I have a druid. Huh? They're both good for different things. The priest is awesome for raids, and the pally is awesome for single target heals. So in a raid situation, as a pally, I'd want to heal the tank or the off tank, and in the priest, you want raid heals. But during instances, they're both pretty similar because of the way that I play, like the pally healer. The way I do, say, priest healing is I hot everybody and I prayer of mending everybody. I'm always prayer of mending the tank, and then it's bouncing around and healing everyone else, but I'm hotting everybody all the time. And sometimes near the end of a fight, I'll jump in and just holy nova everything. And when it's over, everyone's healed, and I just drink some mana and I'm off. But I really just love my priest. And then my pally, pally is like a single target heal class. But what I do with the pally is, I beacon and I put the shield on the tank. I put both of those on the tank because I have this this one talent that if I do a flash heal on the tank, he's going to get auto healed immediately for whatever 500 something a second. And so while that's happening, I have. I'm going to heal anyone else. I'm using a heal bot. And so anyone else that I heal, the tank gets healed. But I also have someone else highlighted as my target that I'm going to do my, what is that? The name of the instant heal spell, holy something. The one that basically does one huge heal. And it takes like a 5-second cooldown or something. So So I basically have the tank's beaconed, he's getting healed. I click heal other characters, and whenever like the clothy is getting beaten down, I hit that one key. I don't even have to target the guy, and he gets healed, and the tank gets healed. So I have like, so the pally heal stuff is really pretty awesome. Well, if you want to make a really great game, you have to be with a great team. So identifying a great team is really hard. Like, you're not going to know that at the very beginning because you have no experience with it if you're just getting in the industry. So getting into the industry from someone who's on the outside, it doesn't matter what your job is. The jobs that are easier on the outside, the ones that are like the writing and the sound and the music, QA and those kind of things, they're on the outside of art, programming, and design. Those are the three cores, right? And those are the ones that get the most intensity. So number one is you have to have a positive attitude. If you're going to go into the game industry, prepare to get your shit canceled constantly. And know that the journey is the reward while you're making a game. Like, when the game is out, the game's done and it's out. Unless you're making an MMO, that's a completely different situation. But most people aren't. So if you're making a game, make the making of the game as fun as you possibly can. To make a really fun game, you need to have fun. If you're not having fun at work, your game is going to suck. So you need a positive attitude, and you need to work as a team with everybody and try and bring the team up and have fun in the environment that you're making the game. Make that environment really fun, because a lot of stuff will come out of that you never expected. And always have the optimism, because it's it's not easy like everybody thinks it is. It takes a lot of hard work, especially for the core disciplines, to get to the level where you could make something like a Doom or a Quake type game. It takes a lot of years. When we made Doom, we did that in 1993, and I'd been programming at that time for 14 years. And Carmack and Tom was a programmer as well. We'd all been programming for the same amount of time. So when we got together, we were experts, and it was a small team of 4 people that were really good at what they did. It was like the Beatles, and people have compared us to the Beatles, and they're not really far off. I mean, they were really good when they got together. Kind of like Led Zeppelin, right? These groups don't come in as novices and just kind of see what happens. These people know how to do it, right? So it's really lucky if you can make a game out of a team that isn't very good. It's really lucky. To make crazy world class stuff, you have to be really good. So, expect to do that after you're really good, and focus on getting really, really good at what you do, and be very, very positive about it. That's going to help you more than anything, because people want to be around positive people. And if the economy sucks, or it's really hard to get a job, if you're a positive person, you're not going to have a hard time, because you're going to have a lot of recommendations. You're going to be somebody that everybody wants to work with. If you can get your name around, always network as much as you can. If you want to get a job doing something, find someone who is awesome at doing that, who is in the industry, and seek them out at GDC and make a friend of them as fast as you can. Because you want to ask them questions about what it takes, and what they do to get good. So you got to be serious about it, and you have to be positive. Those are the 2 biggest things that can push you forward, and survive through the industry. Because, right now, since let's say 95, when Windows 95 came out, it's been 15 years since then, but everybody's been on one machine, right? Windows. It's not very hard, right? I mean, it's one system. And a lot has not changed on Windows. It's still the same kind of hardware, etc., right? But to live through all of the generations of hardware that I've lived through and gone through, right, where you're discarding knowledge every time you go through another big change, like, oh, I know BASIC, throw that away. Now I know 6502, throw that away. Now I know 8086, garbage. Pascal, garbage. You know, like throwing away. You've got to learn new things, or you will not survive. Even though the Windows platform has been around for 15 years, and it looks like it's going to stay here. You know, that makes it easier on everybody. But there's still changes happening in technology anyway, and you have to stay up on those changes. And if everything changes overnight, prepare to change overnight. You know, or you're going to be part of the last people that used Windows, or the last people that used whatever just got, you know, thrown in the trash. So yeah, it's important to just keep pushing forward, be positive, and one of the biggest questions that I get asked is, "Hey, I want to make a game. I have some people that want to make a game with me. You know, we got our own little team, but you know, how do we get money from publishers, or how do we do we do a demo, or you know, how can we make a game? How do we start a company? How do we blah blah blah?" Right? And the clearest, cleanest global advice I can give anybody if they want to start a company and they want to make a game with a team and they want to be id Software again, or they want to just do their own thing, is don't ever ask anyone else to give you money to make a game. You need to do it yourself, and you need to do it at home on your own time, because that's the least risky thing you can possibly do. You're not quitting your day job. You are doing it in your spare time, which shows extreme dedication if you actually do it. And you will test a team out more better than anything if you're asking them of that time. If you're asking people to be in the same place at the same time after work, and you guys can actually finish making something, you have a team. And you know, you have a better chance of succeeding and owning everything that you make than going to work as a cog in some giant developer somewhere. So doing it yourself, you know, takes dedication and hard work, but you will win more than most people understand. And that's always my big advice for everybody. Is just do it and don't wait. And don't ever wait, and don't ask for anything. The more that you rely on people outside of your core people, the more let down you're going to be, because people don't have the same passion and intensity that you have about what you're doing. So if you're depending on someone else out there, they're going to fall down and you're going to take a hit, and you can't let that optimism go away because people fall apart when you're trying to get an internet team together, because the internet teams are hard to make work. You need those people together in the same room to get the synergy and the culture. So that's what it takes to kick ass, is dedication and positive attitude.